spy fiction and all kinds of fiction. To my immediate right, Barry Forshaw, his new book Euro Noir launches tonight. And to my far right, Mike Ripley, who was a critic for many, many years for the Telegraph and the Birmingham News, and has written more about crime fiction than most of us have had hot dinners, if hot dinners is what we like. I'm going to attempt to keep control of these two, but I think I'm going to lose on this, because I'm doing the technology as well, which is a new thing. The way this is going to work, we're going to have to focus on just 5 years of the golden age of thrillers, 1960 to 65, and the authors selected are ones who came to fame during that period. But I'll allow Mike to explain a little more about how he's put together mostly the way this is going to work.
Right, well...
just welcome our guests first.
I wanted to call this panel Two Old Gits Reminisce About Books They Read as Youth, but people insisted there were three of us. Yeah, anyway, we're looking at the 60s as a golden age of British thrillers, as opposed to detective stories, crime novels, whatever. And what we think of as thrillers will, I hope, become clear. And we're looking at the first half of the 1960s, mainly because you wouldn't let us do any more. But it really was a golden age. The international bestseller charts, and I do mean global, were dominated by British writers. I'll say now, before everybody else points out, they were all men. And there were very few women. Women were doing crime writing, but this particular sort of thrillers was a very male thing. And boys own, boys ripping yarns, I suppose, stands to logic. What we've limited ourselves to is there are some names that are missing, and we're quite happy to talk about them in the bar, sorry, afterwards. But people like Dennis Wheatley, Hammond Innes, Victor Canning, Desmond Corey, they were all well-established bestsellers before the 60s. They kept going, so we've excluded them on that rather dubious ground. Now we're going to start off. We're going to take it in turns to do our favourites, and hopefully Peter all he has to do is click a button to move the slides, and we'll see how that goes. Right? So if you're ready, Peter.
Well, the first slide is already up.
The first slide. Oh, jolly good. Yeah, he's quick. Right, and we're starting with Ian Fleming, who, in theory, of course, we're classing as the early half of the 60s, which is when he totally globally dominated, though of course we do know he started in 1953. Anyway, Barry's going to do the first one, and it's Fleming.
So have you heard of Ian Fleming?
Yes.
Okay. There's a franchise of movies that have been going for a few years, just still around. What do you say about Fleming? Who remembers in Thunderball the health report that James Bond gets when he's sent to Shrublands, the health club he has to clean out at, and it says, you're drinking too much, you're smoking too much, your cholesterol is too high. It was Ian Fleming's own health report. He just ran it verbatim in the book. But he didn't listen, and he didn't go to Shrublands, and he clearly felt like someone like Leonard Bernstein, that he was kind of immortal. He is the heir apparent of an early generation of thriller writers like Sapper, John Buchan. There is possibly something of the racism of that earlier era of writers, but I mean, really, who cares? The fact that Dr. No is Fu Manchu, fine, it doesn't matter. You need to have an exotic villain who's possibly physically deformed, is certainly foreign. I mean, that's the real index of their evil in the Bond books. Now it's our nation. It's the Brits who are. But when I wrote Rough Guide to Crime Fiction, an editor added a line. It said, and it wasn't my line, the books are turgidly written. No, they are bloody well not. They are superbly written pieces of crime fiction, thriller fiction, with Bond growing as a character. Don't you agree?
Yes, he was a good journalist.
Good journalist, so all of that is in there. I love the fact that in one of the books, Bond, who is having the exotic meals that we all were not having in the 1950s, is having this plate of exotic food, which is a metal skewer with bits of meat. It's a kebab. Now, for 1953, that would have been exotic food, and trips to the airport, to foreign. That's all. It provides all that as well. But it also supplies the same plot in almost every single book. Bond meets the villain. They have an encounter on a golf course or at a card table. The parameters are established. Then one of the henchmen of the villain tries to kill Bond. Final confrontation. That's fine. That's a classical unity in all of the books. He lost it in the last couple of books. But a lot of the writers we're talking about now follow on from Ian Fleming.
There was an interesting point. Somebody said, I think it was Richard Hogarth, literacy book, that by 1953 or 54, after Casino Royale had come out, or there was some survey done in the mid-50s, that 7 million Britons had heard of Casino Royale, and only like 10,000 had ever been to a casino or had seen one, but they knew it, and it all came from Fleming's book.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because Casino Royale, if you wanted any doubt about how good a writer Ian Fleming is, read the first paragraph of Casino Royale about the smell of a casino early in the morning. This is really good writing. He was a good writer. Cliched, yes. The sex now, which used to shock people so much, is fairly discreet. There are lines like, Bond felt his blood rising. That was about as strong as it got.
I have tablets for that. High blood pressure.
Barry, just say a quick word about Thunderball, because that's a quite unusual thing, because that was a script first, wasn't it?
Yes, Thunderball is... The name Kevin McClory mean anything to anybody?
Well, the greatest Bond villain of all.
He is a Bond villain, in a way. The novel is created as a screenplay with Kevin McClory and Ivor Bryce, but then Fleming decides to run with it on his own when the plans for film fall by the wayside. He doesn't really let them know. So then, the reason you can see a film called Never Say Never Again is because Kevin McClory had the rights to Thunderball.
But who did Fleming want it to go to?
That's a good question.
Oh, sorry.
You know, is that a trick question?
Alfred Hitchcock and Richard Burton.
Indeed. Oh, you mean the original?
Yeah.
He was trying to get Hitchcock to anyone. He wasn't bothered about Thunderball. Any of his books, he was trying to get Hitchcock.
But Hitchcock had made the definitive Bond film with North by Northwest.
Yeah.
That's the Bond film avant la lettre, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So then there's this other part of these thrillers, which is over to you, Mike, the outdoor adventures.
Right, we should have said that Fleming we're taking as the start point for the spy thriller. Okay. Now the other subdivision is my guy, Sir Alistair MacLean, and I'm taking as the lead, certainly the most successful, on what I call for want of a better word, the adventure thriller. The ripping yarn, the boy's own yarn. Now, MacLean's, and there's, at the end, we'd like to sort of try and pull a few threads together to make sure you've got your money's worth. That there is some sort of sense behind all this. But we're looking at what have these thriller writers ever done for us. And one of the things that they have in common, which I think comes through, is that they were all travelled when most of the readers weren't. Now, Fleming was exotic, Gareth touched on exotic locations and going to airports and things. MacLean, like so many of the people we've talked about, was well travelled during the war, and there is an military experience in most of them. And MacLean was in the Navy at a very young age. He served on Arctic convoys, and he then later served in the Far East. Now, the Arctic convoys gave rise to his first book, an enormous bestseller, a war story called HMS Ulysses. And his second and third thrillers were both set in World War II. South by Java, steady. South by Java Head was in the East Indies, and Guns and Navarone, of course.
Yes.
Right? Then after those three, he then moved on to spy thrillers and to the adventure thriller proper. And I mean, this guy really was huge. He outsold Bond. I mean, the estimated sales of MacLean were something like 150 million copies, as opposed to 100 million or so for Bond, and that's even with the Bond films backing up the books. Okay, yes, there were MacLean films, but they were good, clean fun. They still are. They're remarkably innocent, actually. I mean, you could give them to a 10-year-old boy as a learning, to help him learn to read. His own take. He actually said of Fleming, Fleming relies on sex, sadism and snobbery. If you require these things, you are not a writer. And I think that's a bit of the Calvinist Scott coming through there.
Was that his quote? I thought it was Kingsley Amis or somebody.
No, that was MacLean, because he got into terrible financial trouble, and then somebody said, well, there's this like a tax avoidance scheme. What you should do is invest your money and then pay yourself a salary, and all legal and so on and so on. And the accountant who was pitching the idea said, well, that's what Ian Fleming does, you know. And he said, I'm not having anything to do with it.
It was a bit
and
rich.
they actually turned down money.
Wasn't it a bit rich him attacking Fleming, because he quickly fell into formula where Eagles